Dr. Sharp, Mr. Wild, please report to the office. Now!
Welcome to another edition of From the Principal's Desk with Mr. Dennis Wilds and Dr. Chris Sharp. Welcome back, everybody, to another edition of From the Principal's Desk. Hope everybody is healthy at your house. Again, Dennis and I, we're working to get some professional development out there for you. So we hope we can maybe alleviate some of that stress, give you something to listen to, and maybe something to think about. In our last episode, we talked about building relationships, specifically with your kids, your students. Dennis, today I thought we would kind of delve into the staff portion of it. What do you think?
I think that's the direction we need to go, Sharp. I mean, last time we spent a good 20 minutes talking about how we introduce our expectations to students, but we also talked about this being a school-wide communication for expectations. So not only do we need to communicate that to students, we need to communicate it to our faculty and staff as well.
Well, and I think that goes back to the episode we had, I think, two episodes ago, where we were talking about establishing expectations. It's not just for one group. If you're building culture, it's every stakeholder. And when you talk about your students, I've kind of reflected on that last podcast. We're talking about those parents too. As you're reaching out to those students, you're bringing those parents in. And maybe at some point we need to talk specifically about how to engage those parents. But today, I want to get to a topic that I talked about on our blog. And I use the term building a tribe. And I use that term with no offense intended. I spent a lot of time with Native people over the years. I spent some time traveling, and we would always talk about the tribe that we were with, the group of people we were with, whether, Cherokee, Ponca, Comanche, Kiowas, Cheyenne. I've been around several different tribes, and I use that term now because I see that family nature that you build within a tribe. And in my blog, I talk about how in schools and in life, we go through life building tribes in every walk of life that we're in. You have your friends and your close, the people that you trust, that they may not be who you intended them to be, but they're who you need. And in your school, I think that's equally as important, because you can't do this by yourself. Anybody who thinks you can build culture on your own or make a school-wide change or attack change, you're destined to fail. You need people around you. And we're going to kind of go through this. Sometimes the people that you think you want aren't the people that you need. That's going to be an important factor.
Yeah, it's you don't always need the best players. Looking at this from a coaching perspective, you ask any coach, sure, you want talent, but you don't always need the best players to win a championship. You need the right players to win a championship.
Well, you and I both have coached, and I've had star players, quote unquote star players, and they would almost wreck your team. They would almost they were overshadowed the rest of the team so much that the other players wouldn't work as hard, or they resented that player. I've always been the coach. Give me, a lineup of mediocre, decent athletes. We'll win a championship if they'll listen. You got one or two star players that alienate the other, let's say 10 on the court or 10 on the field. You've got a problem. So, and we're going to look at it from that stance. So the first thing when I talk about building relationships with your staff, the first thing is, you've got to get to know your staff, just like you talked about getting to know your students. And one of those things, and I line this out in my blog, is, you've got to listen, and you got to take that qualitative data, that observe data that you have. And I'm not talking about teacher evaluations. I'm talking about looking at what your teachers are doing, paying attention to who's the one that is coming in 5 minutes, 10 minutes, an hour early, who's staying an hour late, who's showing up at the ball games. And that's not, and I get teachers have their parents too. but who's invested in those kids? Who's reading? Having conversations with your staff about professional development. That's not a post conference saying, "Hey, I checked out this book," like you and I do. "Hey, I read this book. What are you reading?" And we have a quick back and forth on where we're at professionally. I think that's important. Making sure that you're constantly looking at what your teachers are doing, what they're reading, how they're interacting with students, and keeping a mental note of who they are. Because one of the things I fell into when I first started in the principalship is I looked at test scores, and that's a dangerous
Pitfall number one.
bingo, man. I'll tell you, I use the test scores. You always look for that top level teacher. They're going to be the ones who are going to set the stage. And a lot of times, best teacher is not the best, team member. I've had a couple that were, phenomenal, bell to bell. They could teach better than anybody. But in terms of school culture, oh, they kill you. People didn't want to work with them. Goes back to that star player.
Yeah, and here's the deal, just talking about test scores, one of your key points that you brought up to me before is you look for talent, not test scores.
Bingo.
I spent some time, after you mentioned that, thinking about it, and here's the deal. We put too much emphasis on standardized test scores. I know they're important, and, we have to prepare for them, and I'm not getting into that debate. But when it comes to identifying our tribe, our leaders, our swarm, our whatever you want to call it, I call them my PAC, my Principals Advisory Committee, my PAC.
Right.
I don't look at test scores because in reality, holding teachers accountable is not a bad idea, but how standardized testing it goes about it, I feel like we use the wrong tool for that task. Standardized testing is not proven to be reliable to measure student performance. They only measure some of the most they only measure some qualities. They don't measure some of the most important qualities in education. Such as creativity, critical thinking, resilience, motivation, persistence, curiosity, endurance, enthusiasm, empathy. I go on and on and on. A standardized test does not measure those qualities, and those are qualities that good teachers, not only do they build and grow students in the content knowledge, but they grow them as people, as students.
Absolutely. And I'll agree with you 100%. You and I have had this conversation several times. If you assess a teacher just based on what their test scores are, you're probably missing the talent that they have. Everybody in your building has a talent. You just have to take the time to find that talent and tap into that talent and know how to navigate that personality. And I would use the current situation right now. If everyone thinks that, teachers don't care about their kids and they're only about test scores, get on Twitter, go on Facebook, go on YouTube. Look at how many teachers are out there making videos, making virtual lessons. They are outside their wheelhouse, working, calling, meeting, taking work to students just because they care. And those are the teachers that you want the closest to you. And that's, I love that you brought up the fact it's talent, not test scores. And that kind of leads me to the next point is sometimes the people that you want to be in your tribe or your pack, they're not going to be the ones that are going to be the most beneficial to you. And I'm specifically, I'm talking about, there are great teachers who they'll go with anything. I don't want to say yes, man, but they're going to agree with you simply because you're the principal out of respect. Sometimes you need to talk to those teachers that are going to be just brutally honest and blunt and tell you like it is. And to me, that is more beneficial than somebody just saying, that's a great idea. That's better than having that teacher that says, go for it. You can do it. We got this. Sometimes having that teacher who's different than you, utilizing their talents, giving you feedback that you need. Because I don't have an assistant principal. I have an interventionist and she'll be brutally honest with me. You used to work with her, you know her, she will, yeah, she will be brutally honest with you. But I need that sometimes, and I think that's an important part of your tribe as you're building it. So, tell me a little bit more about your pack. How did you decide on your pack that you've established at Camp Creek?
Yeah, well, Chris, I know from listening and talking to you, you're a lot like me. I don't want everybody in my school thinking just like me. Heck, that's going to be dangerous. Research shows that different can be good. I recently read an article on Talent Lift that stated that diversity in the workplace, increases creativity, provides multiple perspective, improves problem solving, leads to higher innovation, better decision making, and higher employee engagement. So I want that diversity on my leadership team. I don't want everybody in that group to think just like I do, because I've learned over the years that you don't have to think just like I do, because I don't always think of the right thing. I may think I'm going in the right direction, but when you get in a group of people that look at things from multiple perspectives and different viewpoints, they might point out something and I'll be like, I really like that. And I wouldn't have thought about that on my own, so
Right.
I want that diversity. I want the sometimes the obnoxious, I guess more loud person sitting to my right, and the quiet, person sitting on my left. And, I want those different personalities in the room, guide that conversation, get them to talking and thinking, because they can provide those perspectives and problem solve and things a lot better than a room full of Dennis's would. Me, I don't want a room full of me sitting there.
Well, it'd drive me nuts if I was sitting in a room full of, Chris Sharps. I'm just telling you,
Yeah, I just go in circles.
yeah, and we would never get anything done. And I, just to speak to my own personality, I am a creative thinker. That's what I would consider myself. My weakness is when it comes to logistics. I can come up with ideas, but when I start trying to logically plan them, I get very disconnected, disengaged, and I need people who think differently than me to help our vision come to fruition. And sometimes I can be off-putting to, even people at central office or at the State Department, because they'll ask for ideas, and a lot of times my ideas are there is no box. I've went so far out the box, I'm thinking of something completely different, and they don't want to do that. So having those people to rein me back in helps a lot. And I want to go back to something you mentioned, that quote that you mentioned about organization. I really thought that was great. I just finished a book, and you and I talked about this earlier in the week. They were talking about talent. The book is called Juggling Elephants, and that's not my book of the week, but definitely pick that one up. Juggling Elephants. I've actually got it right here. Juggling Elephants by Jones Laughlin. And he's talking about an organization like a circus. And if you've ever been in schools, there's a lot of similarities between, a circus and a school. But one of the things he mentioned was he was talking about choosing the right acts to put out in front of the crowd. And he mentioned that a lot of times you have a lot of talented people who show up that have a great act, but they don't fit into your circus. Not that they're not talented enough to be there. They just don't fit into what the overall circus is doing. That is what we're kind of talking about in this situation when we're building our tribe. You may have a whole school full of talented people, but not everybody is going to have what you need in your school to help build culture, how to address change. So you need to be very, be wise. Just because you see something in somebody doesn't mean that they're for you. Maybe they're for Dennis Wilds. How many times have you and I done this? Make a phone call. Somebody they've interviewed with us. In fact, I picked up one doing an interview with you. I hired somebody that you had interviewed. Been a great teacher ever since. That's one of those situations. May have not been the right fit for you, but was a perfect fit for Chris. And I think that's where you get into, you're the ringmaster. You're the person who's making that decision.
Sure. And
So
as the ringmaster or the person making that decision, you know the needs of your school. If you don't know the needs of your school, then you need to go do a temperature check right away.
amen. And that's one thing, uh, just like you said, those temperature checks are always happening.
Hmm.
Your tribe, your group always has to evolve. Just because somebody's been there doesn't mean that they may, I don't want to say they need to go away, but they may outgrow their usefulness. They may not be as, critical to the change or the issue you're addressing. Let's say we're talking about school discipline, okay? If I'm talking about school discipline, I want somebody who really understands classroom management. If I'm going to address curriculum, they may not be the most talented person to talk about curriculum. So I
Hmm.
need a little bit different tribe. And that's why I'm going to move into understanding the roles of your tribe. When you get a group of diverse people around,
Hmm.
everybody has different roles that they take on, even if they're not assigned. Like you said, you like the loudmouth who's always opinionated, and the quiet person to your right, the loudmouth to your left. Those are roles. You've got one that's outspoken, you've got one who's a supporter, you've got one who is probably going to be kind of the mediator between the two. There's research out there about group dynamics. I can bring it up with our next podcast, but every group creates this dynamic. And where I've seen it illustrated the best was I've got a group of guys that I like to train with. And, you couldn't find anyone more different than I am. Okay. A lot of the guys, I'm the only, Southern redneck in the whole group. Okay. And, and we've got guys from the Philippines who have moved into the States. I've got guys from up north who are from Ohio area. Some people around here call them Yankees. I've got a woman from Australia that she rides with us. We're as different can be. However, when we get into a group, and I kind of talk about this in my blog, talking about building your tribe. When you ever see a group of cyclists that have been together for a little while, they move into a pattern. They'll ride in a straight line with one in the front and somebody about every 8-10 inches behind them. Okay, so you're riding in unison. A lot of times, your cadence, your legs will move at the same cadence. And after a few minutes, the guy in the front, he'll pull off to the left and drop back, and the next guy will take over and start pulling the group. And this will continue over and over. And what you've done is you've established one, expectations for the group, that we know what's going on. We know who the leader is. We know who the follower is. We know when it's time for us to step up and move to the next level to push the group. And I think that's a great example for schools, because the more you work with your tribe, the more you work with your group, you're going to see the weaknesses within each other. You're going to see the strengths within yourself, and you start filling in for one another. I mentioned my interventionist. She knows who I am. She gets me probably more so than most people. She knows when she needs to step up and help me out. And I know when to step up and help her out. Some of my teachers who I keep close to me, they know what my weaknesses are and I know theirs. So we work together. And I think that's an important thing. And they're going to be the people that pick you up when things go terribly wrong. I'll give you one example. Okay. A couple of weeks ago, we went out for a ride. My tribe got on to me for slacking, because I've been slacking the last couple of months. So they called me and they called me out, and that's okay. We've got, the ringleader. I'm not the ringleader. I'm the redneck crazy guy. The ringleader calls me and says, "Hey, get your rear end out here. We're going riding." And we did. And we started climbing a hill. It was supposed to be an easy day. And there's a hill in town called Christmas. It's Christmas Drive. We call it Christmas Hill. And it's about a 20% grade. And for bicycling, a 20% grade is about like that. Okay. It's a mile climb like that. and and I was out of shape. I'm overweight, out of shape, and I wasn't ready for it. So I had to dismount my bike. I hadn't had to do that in years. Here's where your tribe comes in. As I'm standing on this hill thinking about turning around, because it'd been real easy just to ride down that hill and ride back to the car. Here comes my tribe. The guys I ride with come down to check on me and make sure I'm okay. And they rode the hill, that hill that was, like this, to support me all the way to the top. That's what you have to have in your school. Because as the leader, you are going to have days when it's bad. You're going to have days that break your heart. If you don't have a tribe around you, whether it's other professionals, whether it's family, actually it should be all of the above, whether it's colleagues like you and I, if you don't have that tribe, you are going to find yourself in a really bad situation, in a dangerous situation, whether it be emotionally or for your school needs.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Chris. I mean, everybody understanding their role on that tribe, everybody doesn't have the same talents. We put different, you do the temperature checks, you learn who your staff is, you identify needs in your school, and you build teams or committees or whatever you want to call them to address specific needs in your school. And you put people specifically where they can make the biggest impact. That way they know, hey, I've been put on this committee or this team or this leadership principals advisory committee or whatever you want to call it for a specific reason. They've identified my talent. This is what they expect of me. This is how I can contribute. Just like you've got some people that hold each other more accountable. You've got some people that might be a little quieter, but they do more of the legwork, the unseen work behind the curtains, you try to put people where they fit. The biggest part of our job when building these teams, leadership teams or tribes, as we're referring to them in this podcast, is getting the puzzle pieces in the right place. And
Absolutely.
if it doesn't fit, you got to put it in the right place. Right. So you've got, like we've said, we've got 50 staff members, 40 to 50 staff members in our schools, and we've got to it's important. A big part of what we do is getting each one of those puzzle pieces in the right place where they fit, because when they fit, they're going to make that picture a lot more appeasing to look at, or a lot more functional. A puzzle, if you're trying to cram puzzle pieces into a place that don't fit, you're never going to see the picture. But if you get them where they fit, then you want to see the big picture. Well,
if you don't do it the right way, you get an abstract, and no one knows what you're looking at, right?
Exactly.
And that is 90% of what an administrator, in my opinion, 90% of what an administrator does is learning how to work with people and get the best out of the individuals you have. Whether it's your tribe, whether it's the entire staff, whether it's your students, your parents, you are navigating personalities and looking for the silver lining that you can relate to or that you can capitalize on. When I walked into my school, and I will never mention names, but there were people. I looked at the test scores, of course, I mentioned that earlier, and people would come and tell me, and I'm not just talking about within my school, all over the county. I was new to the county, didn't know anybody, but they would tell you who was good, who was okay, and who was bad. And what I learned was I needed to take that advice and throw it in the garbage can.
You got to find out for yourself. You can't.
Bingo.
Because different personalities, they don't always the big, that's one of our focuses moving on into this next year. My teachers come to me, a couple of teachers come to me and said, hey, one thing I'd really like to focus on or see us focus on, in the next year, especially with our leadership team, is learning each other's personalities, because when there's not an understanding or an appreciation for the personalities, then sometimes you get this minor conflict and you get this, grumbling and, just a little tension, that you've got to deal with. But when people understand personalities and they know who that person is or why they're that way, then they can build a tolerance to that or develop a tolerance to that, and you can still work and be effective together. 90% of the issues that I face, on my teams, people just don't understand each other. And
Right.
I never really thought about it until a teacher pointed that out to me. And, I'm like, you're exactly right. And when these people come to you and say, well, that teacher's a bad teacher, maybe they're not a bad teacher. Maybe that they just didn't understand their personality. Maybe they bumped heads. They were kind of like sandpaper to each other. They never really tried to understand each other or really work together. They just kind of developed this, I don't really get along with them. I don't jive with them. So, they're not really a good teacher. That's not the case at all the time. So I've learned to really form those opinions for myself. And that's a big part of one. Again, that's temperature checks, going around and talking to people. Yeah. Something else that I've struggled with before that I've really tried to focus on for myself, but I also look at other team members, is being open to criticism. That's something that's one of your key points that you've kind of highlighted here. Let's talk about that for a minute.
Sometimes we do have to be, if you're going to build a group, and we talked about they can't all be like you.
Exactly.
Understand that when they're not like you, they be ready when they call you out for, maybe being off task, not getting your work done, or not meeting the group's expectations, because I can be as guilty as anyone else on that team of not meeting the expectations of the group. I think that's an important thing. Just like your temperature checks, you look for feedback from your teachers of what you need to address. You can self-reflect all day. I try my best to be very self-reflective, but I can't see the big picture. You can't see the mountain when you're standing on top of it. So allowing other staff members to have an open conversation with you and criticize you and not be penalized for it will build you as a leader and build your tribe. That trust of they're not going to attack me because I don't agree with them.
Right.
I think that's very important. It's a hard pill to swallow. Don't get me wrong. I've had teachers, when they come in and they tell you something that you really don't want to hear, that can be hard.
Yeah. And the thing about criticism is, just being open to criticism, all that means is that you're able to listen to that feedback without getting emotional, without, reacting with emotion. If you're able to just listen, you may not like it. It may be very inopportune time to receive bad news or to receive some criticism, hey, you need to do this, or why did you do that, or this is not working. But you just have to take it. You have to learn to take it and listen without reacting with emotion. And I personally, I'll be very transparent. That is a struggle that I have. I'm a lot better at it than I used to be. But that's something that I still struggle with from time to time. I don't overreact, but I let things bother me sometimes, maybe to myself. But the way I've learned to deal with that is I look at criticism as an opportunity to learn. They've come to me with this feedback. I can either choose to use it or not. That's my choice, but I can't react emotionally.
Right. Sure. And I'll tell you, here's to get back, there's good criticism and there's worthless criticism. There are people who will come in. I've had people walk in my office and they want to criticize the most, the silliest things. And those are the things you wad up, you toss in file 13 and don't think another thing about. And I think that's one thing when people are giving criticism within the tribe or within your school, don't just say this is wrong. If you're going to complain or you have a criticism, let's offer some suggestions on how to make this right or support to make this right.
Yeah, that's a big thing that, we started talking about at the beginning of this past school year. When we come back in July and late July and I'm meeting with my faculty and staff, that's one of the things we talked about was if you want to be critical of something or if you've got something to complain about or criticize, that's fine as long as you do it in a professional way. But here's all I ask. if you come to me with criticism, come to me with a solution.
Right.
You know, give me an idea of what you're thinking. You know, I don't mind you coming to me with issues or concerns or criticism. All I ask is that when you come to me with that, come with a solution as well. You know, I want people in those meetings and when they're meeting with me to be honest with me, to be honest with each other, not to agree with everybody just because somebody says something, you know, because they're afraid to start an argument in the group. You know, sometimes a little healthy conflict or a little conflict, minor, is healthy. You know, I don't
Sure.
want everybody, you know, just yes, yes, or that sounds great, that sounds great. I want you to give honest input, you know, and if we get 2 or 3 options, then we'll discuss all options and move forward. You know, that's what I look for, and that's what I expect in my tribe or my leadership team.
Well, you could use the example of, uh, building muscle. If you don't stress the muscle a little bit, it will never grow.
Sure.
And I think criticism within the group, has to be constructive, but it has to stretch the group's acceptance of criticism. You don't want to blow it out and destroy it, but you also don't want to be so accepting of everything going on. So, a pushover to the point of we never get anything done. No one ever grows. We're just everything's a happy rainbow. It's never going to be that way. We've got to grow and we've got to be honest with each other. That's why you're there. And I want to wrap this up with a nice little bow. And I want to give administrators 3 key things that I look at for building my tribe. The first one, choose your tribe wisely. And I can't reiterate, just because it's the people you like doesn't mean they're the people you need. Look for talent. Look for people that are going to strengthen your tribe, not for the people you like.
Mm-hmm.
The next one I would say is, and we kind of glossed over this, and probably because we just spent a podcast talking about expectations, but making sure that everyone in the group knows what the goals are. What are we doing? What are we here for? If you've established expectations, like we mentioned in the previous podcast, this is a no-brainer, but you need to establish how we're going to deal with each other in the group. We got to know what our goals are.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right, man. Having common goals provides clarity and direction. You know, a school without a clear vision and mission will continually deal with conflict and struggle with their priorities. You know, so you got to have those common goals. Everybody's got to be moving in the same direction, you know, with the same vision and big picture in mind.
Well, I read a book. It's Zen and the Dude. Okay. The Dude and the Zen Master. It's with Jeff Bridges and a Zen master. Okay. And they were talking about this very simple Zen concept of rowing a boat, 2 people rowing a boat. Now, if you're not on the same page, all you're going to do is go around in circles.
Sure.
Only when you establish that we are doing this together, the goal of the motion together, are you going to move forward. And I take that as the same as change, as school culture, as anything that happens in school. Once we are all on the same page, we've established what the motion is. Now we're moving forward. If we're fighting, so the last thing I'm going to mention, this is probably this is the most important one. Okay, you have your tribe, you have your people, you have your goals. Is establishing group dynamics, and you have to practice. Mm-hmm. You have to establish expectations for every member of the group, and it takes time. I have been the guy who made this mistake. I established a leadership team when I first started. I looked at test scores. I got the people with the best test scores. We sat and talked, and all we did was, I don't want to say fight, but there was a lot of anxiety there.
Mm-hmm.
And I disbanded. I'm like, I can't handle it, because we hadn't practiced enough. We hadn't practiced being honest. We hadn't practiced giving criticism. We hadn't practiced how to establish goals for our group. So understand, it takes time.
What that And really, ultimately, Chris, what that boils down to, and I made the same mistake, when I first put a leadership team in place here a few years ago. We're a lot better now than we were, and we're still growing as a leadership team.
Mhm.
But that's why we communicate our expectations early and often. You have to, when you design that team and you pull everybody together, the first thing that you as an administrator you have to do is you have to clearly communicate your expectations for that group and everyone in that group, whether it be norms or whatever you put out there, and you do that often so they don't forget. Every meeting you review, guys, remember it. This is our purpose. These are our norms. This is what I expect to get out of this meeting. Because if you don't do that, then it is going to be a lot of anxiety because people are wondering, okay, what am I in this meeting for? What, right now I'm Zooming with my leadership team from home. So, if I don't provide some clear direction when we Zoom, and have those meetings, they're like, okay, why did I get up for this? Why, what am I when we hang up from this? What are my expectations? What am I going to do? So there is a lot of anxiety involved if you don't have those clear expectations and they're communicated early and often.
I think that's great. Well, my clear expectation for Zoom, everybody wears pants. Okay.
Yeah.
But
and remember what's in the background.
Yeah, exactly. Remember that you don't have something embarrassing back there. So, and I think practice is the other thing that we also need to, I want to reiterate one more time, understanding that, and you mentioned that every time you meet, you are reestablishing those expectations. The first couple meetings, the first couple times you get together, it's going to be hard.
Mm-hmm.
Just like when I first started cycling, I didn't fall into the line. I was all over the place. I was dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
But my tribe took time to teach me where to be. Sometimes you'll have to take those teachers, those members of your tribe, and teach them what the expectations are, how they should fit into the group. And I think that it's just like a basketball team or a football team. You have to learn your position.
Sure.
If you don't know it, you're not going to be able to play it well.
Yep.
Same difference.
Yeah.
Well, Dennis, let's wrap it up. I know you had a book that you had mentioned to me that you wanted to share with everybody. Share with the rest of the world. What's your book for the week?
Sure. This is not a typical leadership book. The last couple of years, I really got into a lot of school leadership books and culture building books. This is not the typical leadership book that most people are used to reading. It sure wasn't the type that I was used to reading. This is a story about a highly successful coach that suddenly finds his team and his personal life falling apart. During this turmoil, the coach finds help from a very wise man in one of the most unlikely places. And I don't want to spoil the story for you, so I won't tell you too much. But instead of this person, instead of simply telling the coach, he could have easily said, "This is what you need to do to fix your team in your life." But he didn't do that. He kind of guided him through a journey involving self-reflection, soul searching. Man, while reading this book, I related it, directly to myself as the coach. Instead of a basketball team, I've got a team of teachers and aides and custodians and bus drivers. So this book kind of helped me to re-examine my leadership and relationship building skills with those people, and also to prioritize the important things in my life. So the name of the book is Lead for God's Sake by Todd Gongwer. And I hope I pronounced that right, because I talked to him on Twitter the other day and asked permission to share his book, and he was like, absolutely. So I hope I didn't do an injustice to his name. Once again, the book is called Lead for God's Sake by Todd Gongwer. And it's an excellent story. It's an excellent book. It's not a super quick read, but it's a really good read.
Well, it's funny you say that it's not the typical leadership book. I just mentioned the dude in the Zen Master. I mean, it's not the typical leadership book either. But I really do love spiritual tales about leadership, because a lot of times leadership is a spiritual journey. I honestly believe it's a calling, as is education in general. Not to get on my soapbox or my pulpit, but I truly believe, especially in today's climate, you're seeing the dedication, not only to their students, but to their faith with what people are doing for one another, especially for our kids. So Sure. Great choice. Dennis, buddy, I've enjoyed talking to you again this week. Hey, I want to thank everybody for tuning in this week. If you haven't taken time, please give us a like, give us a subscribe. We are on YouTube. We are on iTunes. We will be on Spotify within this episode. So find us somewhere. If you haven't checked out our Twitter or our Facebook accounts, please do so. We'll have them in the comments below. We also have a Facebook group we'd love for you to join. We have a blog that we would love for you to read. A lot of the information we're sharing here stems from those blogs. So Dennis, stay sharp.
Wilds out.
All right, man.